Welcome to Global Vision. I'm extremely excited to speak today about education, which is something that I'm really interested in. And we have with us today Marc Prensky. I mean, wonderful to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So I would like to ask you how you became a champion for education.
Well, I'm a very lucky guy. I grew up in New York City in housing projects, and I was lucky enough to go to Yale and Harvard and the Boston Consulting Group and to have my own business and to travel the world for speaking. So my goal is to help other kids, all 2 billion kids in the world, have these kind of opportunities as much as they can. So I don't really think I'm in education. Education was our solution in the 20th century for people, and it worked for a lot of people. We need something better. Education is now expired for the 21st century. The kids are just different. They need something different. And my solution is, I call it empowerment. I think we need to the kids are on the road to becoming symbiotic, empowered people. And we don't have a system that helps them do that. So that's what we need. And if you're an investor, like these are business people, I say, don't invest in the education space, invest in the new empowerment space.
I love that. I honestly love that. So tell me, what means digital native and what means a digital immigrant?
I am also fortunate in that those terms, which just came up more or less randomly 20 years ago, are now in the Oxford English Dictionary. And what I think has evolved over time. Originally, it was that we had two groups of people who seemed to be very different. We had children, young people acting in ways that confused their parents. And it helped to use those terms to say they were born in a digital age and you were not. And now today, it's very interesting because the digital revolution happened really around 2000. And more or less, we can go a little before or after, but in history, it's going to be 2000. And everybody who is alive today, who is an adult, was born before the year 2000, just by definition. They're over 21. And everybody who is a young person today was born in the 21st century. So that's the definition of, in a sense, what a native is. But it's not enough, because just because you were born somewhere doesn't give you anything, or some time doesn't give you anything. You need to become a symbiotic, empowered person. And that's what the young people of today, or as I call them, the people who happen to be young in the 21st century, lucky them, they are becoming symbiotic, empowered people. And that's why we can't take away their phones. A lot of people want to, and they say, let's pull them back to the 20th century where we were all comfortable around the dinner table. And the kids say, no. To the kids, it's like cutting off a body part. They're already symbiotic with this technology. So why would we want to cut off their body parts just to bring them back into our dining room?
That's brilliant. Honestly, what means to be a designer in global education? Because that's how a lot of people describe you.
Well, now I'm not designing education anymore. I'm trying to design empowerment and what we now call empowerment hubs. And the key to that is I have an acronym called FAR. First, you've got to find your own new beliefs, because beliefs are changing enormously from generation to generation. And you've got to find the unique value that you bring to a team and a company in the world. And that's because everybody in the world is unique. And you've got to find the power that you have by becoming symbiotic with this new technology. And you've got to find the new connections that you have, because these are all things we didn't have in the past, in the 20th century. So you've got to find all those things, but then you have to apply them. And so the biggest thing that we don't do in education is accomplishment. we don't have our kids do anything that makes their world better while they're young. And every kid is capable of doing that. And what's interesting to me is that while education, literacy, reading, writing at a higher than basic level is not something every kid in the world can do, every kid in the world can accomplish. Every kid in the world can set a goal for themselves and form a team if need be, and then change something in the world for the better. So that to me is universal. Empowerment is universal. And that's what we want to go to for me in the future. So I try to design ways to empower kids.
Mhm. And what do you talk about in your book? Digital natives to digital wisdom, which I loved it.
Well, that was I've now written or almost completed 10 books, and that one particularly was just it was my thinking at the time. It's a collection of essays. The book I'm writing now is called Empower Them Now. It's a book for adults, and it's all the ways that we can look at young people differently, people who happen to be young, look at them differently, treat them differently, raise them differently as parents, as when they're in what we used to call the school age, and even when they're looking for meaningful work, do that differently. And so empower them now. But I'm also writing a second book, a companion book for young people called Empower Yourself Now. Because one of the issues is that those people who were born in the 20th century, which is me and you and most adults today, or in fact, all adults today, we don't really know the best ways to empower kids. We're all finding this out together. We're in a time of incredible need to experiment. And that's why the schools are having so much trouble, because they can't experiment radically enough. They have a system that was very well honed. It's the same all over the world. And it's literacy and numeracy, and then what I call the mess, math, English, science, social studies, or whatever your language is. And that's the same in the world. So parents have no alternative for their kids. They can send them to a fancier version of it, or a less fancy, or a public or a private, but it's still the same curriculum. And I think that we are on the verge of really not just needing something else, but creating that. And it's emerging in the world. And I'm very optimistic for that.
Me too. And how do you think that COVID-19 create a challenge in that empowerment to the youth?
Well, what I think COVID did, and I've heard this from around the world, is it exposed what was really going on in our education system to the parents for the first time. And many were just appalled. We're teaching kids things from 2,000 years ago that are not needed or that can be found easily in their pocket. And we're not doing the kinds of things, the kinds of accomplishment that they really need. And we're not helping them become symbiotic with technologies in the ways that they need. So I think this was a wake-up call. And now the whole world wants to reform education, but I don't think education can be reformed. I think education, not your own personal idea of what it should be, but what it is what it was in the 20th century and still is today, that's just going to be there. It's an artifact, and it will last for probably a very long time. But the smart people will move to something else, will move to empowering their kids, will move to helping their kids become symbiotic with technology.
And what skills you will say need the people for the 21st century to cope with the challenges of the 21st century?
Well, the basic two are the ones that the kinds of people that I talked about. We really need to become symbiotic with our technology. And we're starting to do that. The 20th century people saw it as tools. Okay, we can add a few tools, but they're optional. No, that's what's changing now. It is now a symbiosis. There's most things in the world, maybe the exception is loving, but most things in the world you can't do without technology at a high level. So it's time to become symbiotic, and it's time to become empowered, which means focusing on getting things done. And that's something that we really have not focused our young people on at all, but that we can, because they have such new capabilities and, even more importantly, such new beliefs. So the belief that they can, the belief that they have different beliefs about property and privacy and sexuality and God and religion and time and space. I mean, look at this now. We now have a different view of space because we have the the earth world, and now we have the cloud world. So our kids are going to live equally in both. And that's not something that the immigrants are very familiar with.
Yeah. And just to sum up, how do you envision the empowerment of the future? If you want to remove from the vocabulary the word education, we switch it to empowerment, how do you foresee that?
I see the setting up around the world of things that for the moment we're calling them empowerment hubs, where kids will go either in person or virtually to accomplish things that they want to accomplish that makes the world a better place. This is all in service of making the world a better place, which is not something that education really focuses on very much. Education focuses on preserving the past. That's great. But we want the kids to be in service of this, not just the leaders. Everybody focuses on the leaders. Isn't that wonderful? No, we have 2 billion people who happen to be young at the beginning of the 21st century. And we can really help all those people who happen to be young in new ways by helping them become symbiotic, empowered people.
Well, I think you leave us with great things to think about. And as a society, there is a lot of homework to do. I see that.
I hope so. It's very exciting, actually, and I think the kids are very excited by it. It scares a lot of people because the older people did not grow up with it. They don't know it. They're used to what they had. But if we pull our kids backwards, we are really hurting them in a very serious way and keeping humanity even from moving forward and solving the problems that we have in so many places.
Right. So thank you, Marc, so much for just sharing your wisdom with us. And I think that you have a point. We could not continue to empower young people with the systems that we have in the 20th century. We need to come up with new systems. And I think that it really looks simple, but it's not, So
it's not simple, but it's possible.
Exactly.
And in fact, empowering all our 2 billion kids is easier than making them literate or educating them in the old sense, which is now becoming harder and harder. So it's not something that they resist. Kids like to become empowered. They may resist education, but they don't resist being able to get things done. And
everyone wants to be empowered. That's right.
That's right. So that's why I'm such an optimist.
Well, thank you so much for being this champion for this new way of thinking, and also to share it with us, and through your books also we could learn more about that. So thank you so much for sharing too. Thank you.
My pleasure.